I'm Catherine Arndt, the Chief of the VLGA Connect studio. Welcome to today's episode, brought to you by the VLGA, your councillor support network and the national broadcaster on all things local government.
Hi and welcome to VLGA Connect, and it's time for the weekly TGU discussion on all things governance. I can honestly say that this program is the most watched, most listened to program that comes out every week talking about local government in Victoria and beyond. It's a fact, Tony Raunic.
Thought you were going to say the most watched program that I am on, Chris, because it's probably
well, that would be true too, Tony.
Anyway.
That would be true also. And Julie Reid, it would be true for you too, I think.
Well, yeah, I don't know, Chris, but we still can't beat the Matildas, can we?
No.
Because the Matildas on TV got over 11 million people this week watching them in Australia, a record broken. So I don't think we're going to get anywhere near the Matildas. And I know that we're all really sore about what's gone on this week, but, you know, haven't they made us proud? What a great week.
They certainly have, Julie, but you're telling me we picked the wrong week to try and claim record ratings.
We did.
Yes, it was. And of course, it's not over. As we record this, there's the third place playoff, which I'm sure we'll all be watching as well. Lots of stuff that we're watching in local government land. I think today, Tony, we can expect a decision in the Yarra Ranges Shire Supreme Court case that's been brought by the gentleman's name is just Darren Dixon, I think is his name. Something coming out Friday afternoon.
Yeah, that's right. At 2:15, Justice Richards is to hand down her decision in that matter, which was about a challenge to council's, I think, urban planning framework document, claim of a lack of consultation. Yeah. So, that decision handed down at 2:15 today, according to the Supreme Court list and some reports we've received. So, it'd be good to be able to peruse that during the week and see what that has to say about the application.
All right. Hopefully, we'll be across that in time to tell you all about it on the Local Government News Roundup Saturday edition, which is coming, as the name implies, on Saturday. There's been a few council-related stories in the Age this week, some of them related to predictions of what might be coming out of Operation Sandon, for example, and I'll come to one of those in a moment. But trees is starting to get a bit of a theme, Julie and Tony. This sort of underground's not the right word, but after dark movement of removing trees so that it's sort of done in a cloak and dagger way. Were you aware, either of you, that this was happening?
Look, Chris, this has been happening for a long time and it's now hit the media again. Boroondara apparently have issued about $100,000 worth of fines around this space. Stonington are sitting at about $44,000 worth of fines. It's happening everywhere. I've seen it happening down at Bayside. You've got people hacking trees down on the foreshore to ensure views. I've seen it at Kingston where people are taking down trees because it's worth it for them because they can then develop their site fully. I've seen it in Greater Dandenong where trees have been removed and signs have gone up by the council to say, hey, this is once where a tree stood and somebody has destroyed this tree, so then the council has made it really clear that they haven't taken out this tree, but it's been destroyed. So look, I think the argument here in the industry is the fines for removal of trees illegally is too low. At the moment, it sits about $3,800. There's no incentive for people to hold on to those trees. They prefer to pay the fine because the gain that they get through development is far more. So I think the industry is calling out for larger fines. I know the director at Boroondara was saying that it should be sitting at about maybe 20,000, could even go higher than that, but the fines are just too low. They're saying in the east now there's about 10% of canopy cover that actually has been removed. And there's serious climate change impacts from this, destruction of trees. So this is a real issue for councils.
And the follow-up to this, Tony, that's come out a day or so after the original story is that councils are considering naming and shaming as a way of perhaps bringing some more attention to this activity.
Yeah, I did see that. Scott Walker, the relevant director there at Boroondara, has come out and indicated that. And I think that makes sense. Councils are looking at lateral ways to put pressure back on the relevant landowners and developers. There've already been the calls, as Julie points out, for much higher sanctions, much higher fines. That's controlled by state government, of course. So in the meantime, councils will look at, other ways to try and influence the thinking of developers. And I think, that would certainly, a name and shame list would certainly impact on the larger developers that sort of, have a public profile. Perhaps not as much so for some of those smaller builders, people doing, small subdivisions, etc. But nonetheless, I think it's a clever bit of lateral thinking on Borundara's behalf.
All right, we'll watch that one with interest and see whether it actually does move the needle there. A wicked problem, as we have many of in the sector. Another one is this balancing of the right for local people to have a say on developments. And of course, as the squeeze comes on with the need for more housing, we're hearing more and more talk, Julie, out of the government. Sources out of the government suggesting that some of that's going to be wound back under these proposed planning changes that are coming. The Age this week reported that NIMBYs will be blocked from lodging planning objections against medium density housing projects as long as the developers are meeting a certain fixed minimum of affordable housing. What do you think about this?
Yeah, it's interesting, Chris, and I think it's definitely in the Age report. It indicated that there's going to be a housing and planning overhaul announced in the next month. It's going to be unveiled. So I have a feeling that there's going to be something big coming potentially in the next month or so, likely to be in response to not only the housing crisis, but also maybe something to do with Operation Sandon. We'll just have to wait and see. But look, it's interesting that the article talks about how VCAT are acting in the space now of having to really make a lot of the decisions in relation to medium density housing, because a lot of councils are not supporting the development of this medium density housing. It's very, very controversial because of the numbers of objections that are coming through the system. And so the VCAT are sort of making these decisions about how development is occurring, particularly in the inner and middle ring suburbs of Melbourne. So I think the only thing that I'm unsure about is what proportion of affordable housing would need to be in a development for it to have that kind of exemption from going out to the community. That's what's really interesting about this. Now, they also talked about a Stonington example of where VCAT overturned a decision by Stonington Council, and that was sort of trying to prove that getting local people involved in a very emotive issue is not working. That's what they were sort of arguing. So it's an interesting space, and I think we've got some major announcements coming.
Yeah, Tony, we've been getting the read of the room, I guess, on this for a while. If I can just put to you and to Julie, the one thing that jumps out at me that I didn't like about this story is again this suggestion that councils are somehow abrogating their duty to make planning decisions. It says, and I quote, because councils either refuse to make hard decisions or because they are motivated by objections from existing residents. I just think that's so wrong to characterise the role of councils in that way. Do you agree?
It's not a case of refusing to make hard decisions. Councils are making decisions, making difficult decisions, and rightly they're taking into account the views of their local residents, which is absolutely what their obligation is. Look, frankly, I'll be interested to see the detail, but at the moment, what the article revealed to me, it sounded like something a bureaucrat would kind of come up with, in an office building to try and show that they're going to meet some government target, in this case affordable housing, without the sense of practicality, the reality of development, sales, and just, social amenity, people living together. Firstly, if you're going to build medium density housing and make an impact on affordable housing, you're going to have to build the medium density housing at a price, at least the affordable component, at a price that is at least, is cheaper than what available residences are in the marketplace that people can't afford. Now, in Melbourne, you can still buy, residences for 550, 600,000, admittedly in some of the outer suburbs and such. You can't build medium density housing in, North Balwyn and Prahran and, Doncaster for that price. You just can't make it affordable. You've also got, and this isn't necessarily, politically correct, but there's an element of when you add affordable housing into another type of development, there are often issues. And, I'm sure there's 79 CEOs out there going, I'm not sure, Tony, it sounds like a good idea, but I challenge them, if you're going to put down 2.5, 3 million of your own hard-earned cash for a nice apartment somewhere, what are the implications of these housing mixes? I know there's a pretty nice recent development on the Yarra River at Richmond, near one of these, the Swedish furniture store, where the developer was sort of cajoled to add affordable housing in, and go and knock on the doors of the residences there and see the problems where they've got a floor of affordable housing amongst these, very different sort of apartment mix. So I can see that this can work in certain postcodes, but I don't know how it's going to impact upon creating genuinely affordable housing in much of Melbourne, where it's very difficult when you're talking in a medium density housing sense, incorporating this sort of accommodation at an affordable price.
Yeah, it seems to be Chris building this justification as to why councils shouldn't have decision-making powers in the planning space. There seems to be these drip feed of reports coming out that seem to be leading towards what was overall spoken about in the Operation Sandon report. I can't help but think that there is something building over time to then, for then there to be a more major announcement. Anyway, that's my take on it. Interesting comments that Tony made as well. I think that, from a planning point of view, we've always argued that there should be a mix of housing. So I'm quite in support of mixing housing types. And there are benefits to doing that. Rather than keeping all of the social or affordable housing in one space. So I come from a slightly different perspective, but that's the planner in me.
I did note, Tony, that Julie described your comments as interesting.
She did.
And we may well get some feedback on some of that. Just another one of those wicked problems that councils around the state and indeed further afield are dealing with. Another one is council space in services that perhaps traditionally they've been involved in. As things change, we see more and more councils getting out of aged care, out of daycare, kindergartens now. Knox has made the decision this week to exit from direct delivery of kindergarten in, I think, 20-something of their facilities and just maintaining a couple. And they've been hit pretty hard, I think, by some of the media coverage about that this week. Yeah,
I saw that. I think of 28 kindergartens that they currently, directly run, they'll only continue running 2 beyond January 25th. There, of course, will be, those current buildings that are kindergartens will be made available to, alternate kindergarten service providers. There'll be an expression of interest type process in combination with the Department of Education. But I understand this. The mayor at Knox, Marsha Timmers Leach, has come out and pointed to some of the reasons the decision by the state government during the last election campaign to, dramatically increase the free hours of kindergarten, make kindergarten free, in fact, for those 2 years, has meant that there's a overwhelming of capacity at local councils, and the funding hasn't increased commensurately with the demand. And we know this, councils provide, over 100 services typically, and it's not confined to Knox. I hear now that Mornington Peninsula Shire Council are also looking at their 28 kindergarten facilities. The mayor there, Steve Holland's, come out and talked about a $53+ million bill to upgrade and maintain those council-run kindergarten facilities, and council can't fund that clearly by themselves. And he's talked about that balance between, as you say, there's the seniors in the community, sporting facilities, community groups, the roads, the rubbish, and the kindergartens. David Clark, interestingly, the MAV president, I think has really come out and said, I think this is the way of the future. I kind of expect that more councils will be exiting kindergarten services, as you say, as per that in-home aged care arrangements.
Yep.
I'm disappointed. I started my sort of public life, if you like, as the president of the Briar Hill Preschool
really?
kindergarten, and got on KPV Victoria, Kindergarten Parents Victoria, and all that sort of stuff. And a lot of councillors I'm aware of have come through that system, and where they first sort of representing their community. And kindergartens will continue to be important. It's close to my heart. My wife's a kindergarten teacher, but I think it is a fact that councils are perhaps rationalising the number of services they can support in an era where they're under enormous financial constraint.
And I would agree, Chris. It's really interesting, and I think it's responsible of the councils to have a look at their financial sustainability. It's required under the Local Government Act. It's a key principle of the Local Government Act. So, they need to be reviewing their services on a regular basis. And good on Knox for taking the stand on this and really looking at, how they're going to be financially sustainable in this space going forward. We saw it, as Tony said, with aged care. We've seen it with school crossing supervisors. We're now seeing it with kindergartens, and I think this is going to continue. And I think it's expected of councils to regularly review what services they're offering and whether they are going to be sustainable into the future. So I agree that, that they're going about it in a really sensible way, and they're trying to ensure that their assets that they've got will be used effectively by someone who can deliver the service on their behalf.
So you're right. They've undergone what appears to be a very thorough process to get to this point. They've been whacked by the unions. They've been whacked by the minister. They've been whacked in the media. Some of the reporting on this is what concerns me. 1,100 kids in limbo. Come on, they're looking for someone else to run those facilities, and there are other providers out there. Tell me,
Correct.
There's lots of councils that don't run kindergartens. Are the children in those municipalities getting a substandard kindergarten service just because they're not run by the councils?
Yeah. And I think the argument, and I agree with you, those municipalities certainly are serviced by private providers. I think the argument from probably those that work in the system through municipality delivered services would be that where the key motive is a profit, that there may be some more cutting of the number of perhaps teachers, other facilities. So that's the risk. I'm not saying that that's the case, but I think that that's the concern that those in that publicly delivered space would have.
To which I'd say there are also not-for-profit providers in the space, which will no doubt be looked at alongside those others that put their hand up. And I get all those other arguments. It's a big issue for council staff who traditionally are paid better than those private providers. And there's also the argument that it is disproportionately impacting upon women in the workforce. I get that as well. Councils are in a really difficult position, having to weigh up all that stuff and deliver the best value they can for ratepayers. Do we agree that that's wicked problem number 3 for today?
Absolutely.
Okay. Let's move on and talk about conduct just for a change. We've had a decision in a councillor conduct panel determination at Benalla Rural City Council. Tony, you need to declare something up front about your involvement with this.
Yeah, look, I did have some involvement in this, in providing some assistance to the respondent councillor. So this was up at Benalla, as you say, an application by Councillor Poona Gunaratne against Councillor Peter Davis. 6 allegations of serious misconduct, went through to the full councillor conduct panel and was heard in March, I believe, but the decision's only just been released this week. Without going into all the facts, I think some of the key takeaways are, as you say, all 6 allegations dismissed, indicating to your fellow councillor colleagues that, if certain behaviours continue, you will be intending to commence a councillor conduct type application. Wouldn't amount to bullying or serious misconduct. You're merely saying, if this occurs, I'll take this action. There was something interesting in terms of the theatre of councils, and we often see that in the chamber. We don't necessarily like every speech by a councillor to be wooden and read. In this case, the councillor conduct panel members said the dropping of a sheet of paper for some sort of theatrical effect by a councillor whilst speaking on a motion, that wouldn't amount to threatening behaviour. It was part of the theatre of council, underscoring a point, if you like. And finally, a councillor saying to his colleagues at a councillor-only meeting, look, if we keep having sort of an inordinate number of questions being asked at the ordinary council meetings by councillors on one agenda item, then I'm going to call a point of order. That isn't intimidating or threatening behaviour. That's a councillor saying, I'll look to use the governance rules if I think that's appropriate. So they were the key findings of this decision, and it goes back into that, I guess, library of decisions to help guide councillors about, what amounts to robust debate and what falls on the other side of the ledger, what is bullying or serious misconduct.
Good summary, Tony. Thank you. And as you say, those decisions are uploaded to the Local Government Victoria website for all to see and learn from. I've got wicked problem number 4 for you folks. This one's out at Mitchell. So council's responsibility to support the community in particular issues that the community feels very strongly about, in this case, a proposed quarry, but at what cost? It's been revealed that Mitchell Shire's legal fees over the last 5 to 6 years have exceeded $1 million, about 1.3 million, with the bulk of that last year. And of course, that's got some local media attention, as you might expect.
It has, Chris, and this is the cost of council sort of joining with community-led campaigns, and the community expects the council to back them, expects them to, come forward with campaigns and help them through this very tricky situation where there's likely to be a quarry in the middle of, what is going to be a number of residential homes. So the question there is, how much should the council invest in something like that? Should it be, should it have no cap? Should it actually just continue on for as long as it needs to be? How are they going to manage those costs in that situation where the community expects the council to support them? So it's a very, very difficult situation that the council finds themselves in, and the costs can rack up pretty quickly. So, what's the cost for protection of the community is the question that I would ask. Yeah. So maybe the legal view on this would be interesting, but that is the cost of supporting a community. And I don't know. I don't know where I sit with this one just yet.
Yeah, so I'll put to you, Tony, the CEO's response to the press article was that this is a reflection of the importance of the issue to the community. And I guess at some point along the way, you probably think, have we spent enough, but can we afford to stop now?
Look, I agree with Brett Luxford there. I know this community well. I live very close to it. I ride my bike, drive through it. There are lots and lots of no quarry at Wallen and Beveridge signs through Mitchell Shire. This expenditure is over an 8-year period. So, it's a bit cheeky, the article, which includes a little computer generated photograph of a receipt from a cash register, as though, council went in and dumped sort of $1.3 million on the table, which of course it covers a lot of disbursements and such as well. If council are successful, they would retrieve or recover some, not all, definitely not all, but some of their legal costs. This is a unique issue. So we're talking about a precinct structure plan that was put out for public consultation that didn't have a quarry. People went in and bought into estates, residential estates on either side of the site that ultimately now is being proposed for a quarry. So it has got some unique circumstances. And one other thing we should be aware of, this was published in the North Central Review.
I thought you might go here. Yeah.
Now,
I was going to if you didn't, Tony.
There's a little disclaimer, what's the word? No, a little reveal down the bottom of the article that the owner of the North Central Review, where this article was published, also happens to be the owner of the land where the quarry is proposed. Yep. So, I'm not, they did the right thing. They revealed their conflict in the smaller font down the bottom.
Interest, yes.
But, I would suspect it's written from a perspective.
No doubt. No doubt about that. Thank you, Tony. I was going to make sure we got that point in if you didn't go there. All right, so let's leave that one there. I don't think there's any sign of that being resolved anytime soon, based on some comments in the story. Some more news in passing. Actually, no, before we do that, I want to go out to Horsham, where the local paper there, the Weekly Advertiser, has published a story about the ongoing abuse that local laws officers are copping, parking inspectors, etc., and the council and the local police joining together to let the community know that this is just not on.
Chris, this is really serious, and I'm hearing this across the sector. I've been hearing this for years, the risk that local laws officers find themselves in, where they're being threatened by members of the community. I now believe that some councils are introducing devices where local laws can wear these devices, and so conversations can be recorded because it's their word against the person who's abusing them on the street. So that's really for their safety and to minimise risk, which is great. You'd be interested to hear the worst case scenario that I heard of this happening was in Westminster in London, when I worked in London, where a parking officer got thrown through a shop front window. This is the kind of stuff that goes on, and this was years ago, but, this is an ongoing issue. And I think that now putting these devices on these officers to protect them, I think is a really good idea. But this respect towards those officers needs to change. It's like, it's a serious wicked problem for the councils.
Yeah, it's just not on.
Chris and Julie, I think this is something we're seeing in the regional centres, particularly with the move from the old grey parking meters that you put your coins in, now to much more up-to-date technology where you use an app on your mobile phone, you pay by a credit card. Understandably, and I should say that this was still a cash option here, but understandably there are people in the community that are struggling with this. But it's just, we've got to move with technology. People would have struggled with cars being introduced at one stage, instead of horses and carts. It's still pretty damn good value to park in Horsham. It's $1.50 an hour. And I noted the point that the local laws coordinator, Jason Brady, made, is that it's gone up 50 cents an hour in the last 10 years, the cost of parking in Horsham CBD. So I reckon Sunil Bala, the mayor, Robin Galeen, the mayor, and Sunil Bala, the CEO, and the team of councillors and officers are doing a pretty good job about limiting, cost of living impacts for motorists. If, only a 50 cent rise per hour across 10 years, that's pretty modest, I would have thought.
Yeah, I think people just don't want to have to pay for parking at all, I think is the bottom line there, or some people. And it's really sad when a council staff member's child asks them whether they're safe in their workplace because of Facebook activity about issues like this. Our best to the team at Horsham on that one, and good to see the police supporting the council in a campaign there to spread the word that it just is not on. Now, a couple of passing notes. We want to congratulate Rebecca McKenzie at the City of Glen Ira, who, it's been announced this week, has received an extension of her employment there as the CEO through to February 2026, which of course gets it well through the current election cycle. So congrats to the council there and to Rebecca. Seeing lots of nodding and smiles from the rest of the team.
Yeah,
and
interesting. I think Jim McGee, I was going to say Jim McGee, the mayor, came out, and what was interesting here, and absolutely congrats to Rebecca, and Jim in a LinkedIn post has listed some of her achievements since 2016, and there are many, great employee engagement results, community satisfaction surveys, etc. But what really struck me was Jim saying, look, what we wanted to do as a group of councillors is we didn't want the time to make a decision about the CEO's contract to fall very early on in that new council, post-induction period where, you might have new councillors elected. They've really just met the CEO. They're trying to make a decision about, their performance, whether they're the right person. It makes every sense to me that people who've had an opportunity to observe, work with that person over a period of time and making that decision. And I remember getting elected in 1999 and, a month later making a decision about CEOs, really, really tough. So I think good foresight by councillors at Glen Ira.
Really good point. And just on the current CEO appointment status, we've got Hindmarsh, Greater Shepparton, Bass Coast and Greater Bendigo on the list now as needing to be determined in the coming months. Greater Bendigo has advertised because Craig Neiman is stepping down there in December after, I think, 16 years in that role and 40 years in local government. We know Ali Wastie's left Bass Coast to go to Greater Geelong, and I understand Ali will be taking up the role at around about the end of this month. So we're wishing her the best as she goes in there to see how things can be improved in Greater Geelong. There's plenty of critics out there that can help her with some advice, I'm sure. Greater Shepparton have said they will advertise the CEO position. That's, I think, going to be occurring in the back half of this year. And of course, we know that they're advertising at Hindmarsh at the moment. So we'll keep you up to date on those. Team, the Strathbogie Shire Council Monitor, the second of those two monitors this term, has wrapped up his work this week. That's Peter Stevenson. My mail is that he has already submitted his report to the local government minister. So we wait to see what, if anything, comes of that.
It'll be interesting reading, won't it?
It will.
Resignations in recent times there, so that'll be very interesting.
There have, and I think there's one outstanding vacant. Oh, no, actually, I think that's been resolved because there was only one eligible remaining candidate. So we haven't caught up on those either. There's been a few countback outcomes, and there's a list of those on the Local Government News Roundup website if you'd like to bring yourself up to date. What else can we tell you about before we look at a couple of interstate stories? There's two local government Victoria consultations that are closing soon. They're looking for input from anyone, from the entire community, on ministerial guidelines relating to payment of rates and charges and the valuation averaging mechanism for local government rates. These have been a little bit under the radar. don't you think, guys?
They're on the Engage Victoria website, so go on and have a look. There's lots of information in there, which is really useful. So obviously the rates and charges one has come from the original Ombudsman's report in 2021 with some Essential Services Commission advice to the Minister, which is really interesting to read. So worthwhile getting up to speed on that. But yeah, it's they've come out quite quietly. I'm hoping that what has happened is the CEOs of councils have been briefed by LGV about it coming out. Hopefully everybody's aware of it.
Yes, and I think these are actions too that come out of that review of the planning system that was done a couple of years ago now, I guess it was.
That financial hardship piece on that, the first one, there's a bit of, there's a fair bit of chat about that at the moment, as you understand, as cost of living impacts. So that first one, the guidelines repayment of rates and charges will I think does deal with how councils ought to go about considering what amounts to financial hardship, and what are the processes for payments that should be established within councils.
All right, so the clock is ticking for submissions on those. I think one ends at the end of the month and one just a little bit into September. Interesting story from the ABC this week that shows that if you live in one of the fast growing areas of Melbourne, and by that we mean those outer areas like Wyndham, Melton, Whittlesea, Hume, etc., you are less likely to have access to a public library than if you live in one of those inner smaller populated, not so much smaller population, but older demographic municipalities in terms of public library access, which is a really interesting look at the data that's come from Public Libraries Victoria.
And look,
it makes sense, doesn't it? Like in an established area, you're going to have more public infrastructure, and it seems to lag in the new growth areas. And I was interested to hear what Lara Carley, the mayor at Melton, said, the council, growing areas like Melton, they have to really have early planning, timely investment in order for these public facilities to be up and running in time for the residents. And there's a lag at the moment, and it's something I think governments need to be conscious of when they're allocating funding.
Yeah, and look, growth is happening so fast in those areas as well that it's always been the case that the growth is happening faster than they can deliver the services potentially. So, but big plug to the libraries in that they've got amazing digital resources nowadays as well. Libraries are amazing hubs for and provide public spaces for people on low incomes, for students, for people that really need access to services to help them in everyday life. So they are amazing in what they offer, and they are really important resources for the community. But there are some amazing digital things that you can access via the website as well as a community member. So not forgetting that libraries now offer far more than just a public space than what they used to.
Good point, and you're preaching to the converted, Julie. Long may they continue to exist and adapt, as I'm sure they will. A few things happening interstate. Now, we don't have to talk about all of these. I'll throw some of these at you. This one particularly caught my interest this week, and I've watched the meeting of Port Macquarie Hastings Council, which occurred yesterday afternoon, where the Mayor, Peter Pinson, flagged a motion to effectively remove the Deputy Mayor from office, just remove the Deputy Mayor office from being in existence as of the date of the meeting. That went through yesterday on the Mayor's casting vote. And what's happened in Port Macquarie Hastings is a councillor resigned, has not been replaced. There's now this situation of lots of tied votes where the Mayor gets to use a casting vote. So the council clearly is divided. Interested in your take on this, Tony or Julie. The Mayor said, I believe by removing the Deputy Mayor role will level the playing field and lower the political games that may occur in the lead up to the September 2024 local government elections.
Sort of assuming, isn't it, that the Deputy Mayor has that level of a platform that can sort of challenge the Mayor, and if they were for different sort of persuasions, that there might be then some tension there. I think removing the Deputy Mayor position in that situation doesn't necessarily mean that other councillors who weren't supportive of the mayor aren't going to be still be vocal. But this is case of I think clearing the decks a little in the lead up to an election period. And as you say, this is a very divided council, very closely divided, with very much, us and them, two sides. And I think there was also a fear that we'd come down to a deputy mayoral ballot that was decided by, pulling a name out of a hat.
Yeah, or a chook raffle, it was called, I think, in debate. Yes,
and it was just going to be another source of contention there.
It feels very political.
Think they could work these things out more amicably, but it's clearly not happening there.
It does feel very political, doesn't it? Yeah. And another interesting observation when I watched that meeting, a number of items, just thinking about the Operation Sandon recommendations, a number of items were pulled aside and voted on in block at the start of that meeting, like about 10, or I want to say, items, which I thought was interesting.
Not a good look. Not a good look.
No, it's not, is it? Okay. No real surprise here. The mayor at Mount Gambier has banned councillors from asking operational questions at council meetings. She wants them to be more strategic and policy driven. I mean, that makes sense, doesn't it? But obviously there's been some behaviours there that have gotten, perhaps, I'm just surmising, out of hand, that she's felt the need to make that call.
And it's good that she's made that call, Chris, because if it is getting out of control, then, it's good that she's taking the leadership role and trying to sort of rein it in. I mean, councillors get reports in advance of meetings, and they've got plenty of opportunity to ask lots of detailed questions behind the scenes if they want to, from the CEO. So what is that all about?
Yeah.
You do question, why would you ask a whole lot of operational questions at the council meeting? What are you trying to prove? What is the intention of that? So obviously the mayor has seen an intention that is not very positive, so therefore trying to put a quash on it. I think it's a good thing.
Spoken like a true ex-council CEO. Thanks, Julie. And I agree. Tony, any thoughts?
Yeah, ex-CEO. Thank you.
Yeah. Look. I understand the motivation. It's people wanting to be showing the public that they're on the case, and they're, it's not just that things are being done, but they're being seen to be done by the representatives. But I agree with you. It's Julie. You can put in a service request as a councillor. If we're talking about, the state of a road or a footpath, I don't think it necessarily needs to be, done in a public forum, time wasted, and really to grandstand and say, look at me. It encourages other councillors then to do the same thing, and before you know it, it's a little bit of a competition to see who can get the most airtime on this.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
One out of Western Australia, where a young councillor has said she will not be re-standing for election in Kalgoorlie-Boulder. This young councillor, Amy Astill, elected at 19. She's published an open letter describing the sort of behaviour that she's been subjected to. And I know it's one side of the story. There's always three sides, aren't there? But it's an interesting read, and it certainly echoes some of the commentary that we've heard around the sector more broadly about barriers to participation, particularly for the more diverse groups, women, people from multicultural backgrounds, disabilities, etc.
And look, it's not a great reputational issue for it's not great reputation that the council will get with, councillors coming out and making these kind of statements. But, when they're subjected to allegedly sort of insults and laughing and being made to feel stupid, this is the kind of stuff that she talked about. This behaviour really is not acceptable, So I can understand people saying, I'm not going to tolerate this kind of behaviour, and good on her for standing up and saying that.
Yeah.
And, as a result of it, it just sends a really, really strong message back to the sector. So thank goodness people are stepping up and saying that, but it just shouldn't be happening, Chris.
Agree. All right. There's a link to that on the Kalgoorlie Miner newspaper if people want to read that. One quick one out of the UK. I always like to put a UK story in for you, Julie. I know you love the mother country. There's lots of consternation about privately run debt collection agencies being hired by councils to collect their debts, particularly at the moment in a cost of living crisis. These companies are reporting record profits, and it's not going down well with charities and other groups. Not a good look.
No, it's not really a good look, Chris. And, you know, I couldn't help but think about how does that relate to the investigation by the Ombudsman into councils, you know, responding to ratepayers in financial hardship. You know, there was a sort of a little bit of a tiny link there, although they're going in much harder in the UK using these, you know, private bailiffs. But, you know, we know the financial situation that the councils are in over in the UK. It's very, very difficult for them. So they must be thinking about, well, you know, how can we collect all these fines that are due, all these debts that are due or whatever, and going in really hard to see if they can actually, you know, bring some income back in. But it's really bad press.
Another handful in the last week or so have indicated they'll be issuing or likely to issue Section 114 notices, which means that they're basically on the verge of bankruptcy. Yeah,
it does sort of this example of, you know, sending in the bailiffs does sort of point to some desperation from the councils. I mean, in what we see in Australia, or certainly in Victoria, typically when, you know, there's a backlog of unpaid rates, is councils will often just wait for the next transfer of that property, and then, of course, with their statutory rights under the, you know, the Property Law Act and these things, they can step in and demand that there's an adjustment between the vendor and purchaser, and the council gets their $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 then in outstanding rates plus interest. So, you know, you'd only be jumping in with the bailiff if you desperately need the cash now and you can't afford to wait and watch the interest just accrue over time, which is typical, you know, the typical process in Victorian councils.
We need to probably bring this to a close, so we'll quickly do the picks of the week. And Julie, this is one out of Casey.
Yes, that's right, Chris. The Star Journal reported this week that the former Casey councillor Steve Bearden has questioned the need for councils to cover legal fees for councillors before court or other legal investigations, and called for councils to restrict any and all meetings between councils and developers without senior council staff being present. Obviously, this has come out of the IBAC Sandon report. So ex-councillor Bearden was saying that that the community deserves to know how much money was being spent on legal costs defending former councillors. So he's got some real concern about the transparency of that and thinks that that should be capped. So he's sort of saying that that there needs to be a review of this, and there needs to be some kind of cap, and that councillors need to pick up some of the cost of this because the community shouldn't be.
Yeah, I sort of think that this should turn on ultimately what's the finding. So, you know, if a councillor's found guilty of serious misconduct, in this case potentially corruption, well, no, I don't think the local community should have been paying for that councillor's defence. But, you know, it is a fact that if you're a councillor, if you're a mayor in particular, you can be the target for some kind of vexatious type unfair litigation. And if you're merely just, you know, acting in good faith, performing your role as a councillor, and that leads you to be a respondent. So I'm not saying whether you're being the plaintiff or a respondent or a defendant to an action, then I sort of agree with the Casey governance manager, I think quoted here, Chloe Casey, that that there should be you know, some indemnity provided by the council for councillors in that position.
Okay, good one, Julie. Tony, your pick of the week, nice little story. I did see this too, out of the city of Monash.
Yeah, I just thought I like these kind of practical efforts to achieve, you know, recycling, climate change, whatever it is. Everyone, you know, people like to point the finger at organisations, often at this local government sector, about virtue signalling. This is something really practical where Monash have combined with Apparel, with a U, Apparel Recycling, basically trial the collection of old council uniforms from staff. Staff can drop off their uniforms at the operations centre store. They get shredded, these old uniforms, and they turn into things like carpet underlay and stuffing in cushions and pet beds and such. 6-month trial. So I reckon good on the Monash team, CEO Andy Diamond and her team for exploring what's I think a practical way to recycle. I'm not sure how well taken up this will be, but I think it's a good initiative.
I think so too, with that scary stat that 6,000 kilograms of clothes sent to landfill every 10 minutes, just in Australia.
Yeah, I think it's a great initiative. I think a lot of councils will pick it up. The last thing we need as well is secondhand council apparel ending up in an op shop and somebody purchasing it and walking around pretending that they're a parking officer.
Oh, good thought. I hadn't even thought of that angle. Yeah. Okay.
I bet you they have to cut that bit off, don't they?
Yeah, that's right.
All right. I don't have a pick of the week. I have a quote of the week, and it goes out to South Gippsland Shire Mayor Nathan Hersey, who, in the midst of all this Korumburra mushroom poisoning saga, terrible story, of course, that we've been following, he's provided a bit of common sense perspective here and said, and I quote, "This is not midsummer murders. This is Korumburra, and this is real people's lives." I mean, I like Midsummer Murders, but I would never want to visit there. I'm glad it's fictional because your days would be numbered.
Old Inspector Barnaby. There's a murder every week, isn't there?
Yeah.
No, I don't think that's happening in Korumburra. This is the first time I've heard of anything of this nature in Korumburra, Leongatha.
And great leadership from Nathan Hersey this week in dealing with all of the press, all of the pressure that community is dealing with at the moment. So hats off to South Gippsland.
I noticed one of the commercial TV networks running a promo for their bulletin, and the headline was "New photos tonight of the Korumburra mushroom poisoning victims." I mean, seriously, what is it that hard to fill an hour of news? Anyway, back off the soapbox. I just want to do a big quick plug for VLGA Connect local leaders. There's some new episodes in your queue if you haven't seen them yet. Go back and have a look at the Rebecca McKenzie one if you haven't, in light of the discussion we had a little earlier. The newest one that's out there is the Mayor of Merribeck, Angelica Panopoulos, the youngest ever Mayor of Merribeck Moreland, and we have the Planning Panels webinar happening today. It's probably, by the time you see this, it'll be over and gone, but it's the next in the Operation Sandon series, so look out for the opportunity to watch that back if you're not part of it. Tony, Julie, thank you as always. That's been a bit of a marathon effort this week. We've had a lot to get through. We'll have to try and be a little bit more circumspect in what I put on the list in future, so it's not to take half your day from you.
It's a bumper this week.
Thank you, Julie, and thank you, Tony.
Good stuff, Chris. It's your fault, Chris. You putting those articles in the list. It's not our fault for just raving on and talking, is it, Julie?
There you go. It's all on me. Thank you, Tony. Thank you, Julie. Thank you to Hunt and Hunt Lawyers and the team there for supporting VLGA Connect and TGU. And thank you for watching and listening, and we'll see you again next time. Bye for now.